Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sacramento Public Library's third Game of Thrones book hangout. We're going to be talking now that the third season, or I'm sorry, the fourth season, third book, fourth season of the HBO show Game of Thrones has wrapped up. We're going to talk a little bit about the season, how it compares to the books that it came from. We're going to keep this as spoiler-free as we can, although if you've not seen any episodes of the show, you're still waiting to see the finale, probably want to wait to watch us on YouTube later before we get into this stuff. But we are going to do our best to not spoil anything from future books that have not been shown in the show yet. So before we get started, we will introduce ourselves. My name is Justin Azevedo. I am a librarian at the North Highlands Antelope branch of Sacramento Public Library and honorary member of House Stark. And I will allow our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Amy Calhoun, and I'm the virtual branch librarian. And I bring you online services like the ebooks, the website, and these really cool online book discussions. So I am going to say that I would probably be a part of House Greyjoy if I had to choose, just because I love their motto, I don't sew. I do not SEW sew or SOW sew. So yeah, House Greyjoy. What is dead can never die.
All right. And
hi, I'm Andrea McCune. I'm a technology assistant at Central Library, and I would say that I would be, let me think, I would like to be in House Targaryen. However, I took a Facebook quiz, and it told me, and you know how truthful those things are. It told me that I'm in House Lannister, so I don't really know what that's all about. They do say that a Lannister always pays his debts, and I have a pretty good credit score, so that's probably why they put me in that house. Otherwise, I'm not sure why. But yeah, so I'd say I'm a Lannister, I guess.
The internet knows best.
Yes, especially Facebook.
All right, so before we sort of jump into the book-related stuff, let's talk about the finale just aired Sunday night. Overall impressions of what we just saw, how the season wrapped up.
Well, I think that it was an interesting finale in that, maybe the previous two episodes leading up to it were maybe actually a little more intense and dramatic, but in a way it was kind of nice to just have some things tied up and not, have at quite as high of stakes in the last episode while still really leaving you wondering what's going to happen with some of the stories and definitely moving several of the stories forward. What did you think, Andrea?
Well, just to give you a little background about myself, I've only read up to the second book, Clash of Kings, but I'm fully caught up to season 4, the finale. So my impression was that I was really impressed with it overall. I was very happy. It had a lot of I don't know, like every scene something major was happening, something pivotal was happening. There was a lot happening in every single scene. It switched back and forth, so a lot of action. And going into a season finale, I always have really high expectations, especially with Game of Thrones being my favorite show of all time. And my expectations were met overall, so I was very happy.
So, and for our live viewers, I just want to mention that you can comment on Facebook or using the Google Q&A app, and we definitely will try to answer your questions and read out any comments you guys share with us. So feel free to chime in.
Yeah, jump right in.
So I definitely, one of the key scenes I really liked in the finale was when Stannis showed up at the wall and they had that aerial shot of the cavalry riding in.
That was great editing.
Right, because it was only a couple of seconds maybe, but it really showed the organized force, just outflanking and overwhelming, kind of this massive but unorganized force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the wall scenes, I mean, one of my big complaints with a lot of the battle scenes in the whole show is that they're not as grandiose as I want them to be. Like I remember the Blackwater episode a few seasons ago. That was such a huge deal. We were waiting for it, and the ship combat was phenomenal. But then when they landed, there was like 20 guys, and I wanted more. And the attack, just the whole attack on the wall sequence, like that whole episode, and then Stannis showing up, felt big to me.
No, I have to say, it drives me crazy every time Stannis shows up not wearing a helmet, just so we can recognize who he is. It's like, that's really irresponsible. You are the supposedly the king of the Seven Kingdoms. Trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also noticed the exchange between Melisandre and Jon, and I'm wondering what's going to happen with that because they showed that, and you're like, ooh, what's going to happen? Because you know how she is, and I wonder if she knows more about him because of the person that she is. I'm not sure, but that was interesting that they gave a little glimpse of that, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen with their story now that Jon is with Stannis and Melisandre.
Yep. Yep. The Tywin was the payoff that we were all waiting for, and that was one of those things as a book reader that I'm sitting there going, it's coming, everybody. And I also feel like, and Andrea, you were not a book reader, so you can comment on this probably, but I kind of feel like that was also sort of a bone thrown to people who aren't book readers, just following the show, and kind of are still traumatized by Oberyn.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, hey, remember when we killed Joffrey? Yeah, we'll kill Tywin. Come on back.
And I see we have a question from one of the viewers. So Andrea is asking, what did you think of the fight between the Hound and Brienne?
Ooh. That was such a great scene because both of those characters, you love both of them so much. I mean, I love Brienne. I think she's a very strong, powerful woman. And then you start to like the Hound after a while, even though he killed that little boy Micah, and Arya was really upset about that. He still has some really good qualities. So you have these two really strong characters going head to head, and they're having the most brutal knockdown, drag out fight. I was very happy with that scene, and you're kind of rooting for both people because you don't want either to get hurt, and unfortunately it was the Hound, and I don't want to say unfortunately because I didn't want either one to get hurt, but the Hound got hurt, so that was an interesting finish for that because I did not expect that to happen. I was kind of thinking Brienne would probably get hurt, but it ended up being the Hound, so we'll see what comes of that in the next season because they kind of left it off on that cliffhanger, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting fight because, it was a great fight scene and showed the real, it's interesting because also both of them have said at different times that they're not knights, and they make that distinction, and then it gets into that part at the end where it's, kind of all holds are off, and there's punches and ear biting and craziness. But it really kind of illustrated both of the characters' personalities too, beyond just being a good fight scene, and I thought it was funny how they both, immediately went to, okay, we're going to fight this out, and we're not even going to pay attention to the thing we're fighting over, who, Arya manages to slip off during that scene. So I thought that was a really good illustration of all the personalities involved.
Yeah, another question from Michael has come in. What are some book versus show differences that you notice, which we're going to get to pretty soon in this conversation? And this is one of them. I loved that fight because I feel like it was the showrunners messing with the people who have read the books and were expecting something. So me personally, I've been spending weeks assuming it was the bite on his shoulder because we knew eventually that the Hound was going to be too injured to keep going, and that Arya was going to leave him behind. In the books, it was that first fight at the end, right? He gets injured there, but he walked out of there, and then later he gets bitten, and they kept talking about you should cauterize that. Oh no, I don't need to cauterize it. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, that's what they did. That's what it's going to be. He's going to get sick. The wound's going to go bad, and then Brienne shows up, and they go at it. It's like it was like Christmas Day. It's like yes, more
Yeah, and I'm starting to appreciate the divergence from the book because, yeah, it's not all just everything that you expect, and especially when they add something in that feels true to character, true to the themes of the book. I like that fact, and especially if they end up outpacing him with the ending. I definitely do not, want to see what his intended ending is in the show form before I've read the book, just as I started out as a book reader. So I prefer that they just make it up out of whole cloth if it comes to that.
Yeah. What about before we move on, any other key scenes other than the finale? I'm sure surely there's a couple of other scenes in this season that are worth mentioning.
Ooh. Well, Oberon's brutal death by the mountain. It was such a great battle, and unfortunately, Oberon did not make it out alive. But I thought that was a really great battle. Of course, the entire time I'm saying, "Come on, Oberon, kill him already! Come on, hurry up!" And it didn't work out that way. But that was such a pivotal scene because Oberon was such a likable character. He was one of those people that you saw as a hero, and he was fighting for his sister who was murdered by the mountain and her children. So it was definitely a noble cause, and it just doesn't work out heroically for him, or it doesn't work out the way he intended it to. So I often wonder if there's any happy endings in this series, because it doesn't seem like anyone has a happy ending ever.
Yeah.
About that.
Arya, kind of. Yeah. Maybe not happy,
Yeah.
but awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because definitely I noticed that the revenge in this case, that drive for revenge, was Oberon's downfall, and it's like you could have had your revenge, if you had just, focused on the fight rather than getting that confession. So, but then there's other times when people satisfactorily get their revenge, like Arya has crossed a few names off her list. But yeah, so I don't know if he is trying to kind of do this theme that it's totally random, or in the long run, does this mean potentially worrisome things for Arya, since the message is, no good can come of being so revenge-driven.
Yeah. I personally was blown away by the Purple Wedding. This, I believe it was the second episode of the series, or the season. That's another scene that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, and also being smug about it, like, wait till you see what happens to Joffrey. But the lead up, they had made some small changes throughout that episode to kind of play up what was going to happen. They made Joffrey even more terrible than he is in the book leading up to it. And the actual death scene itself, like, I was surprised how much it affected me. Like, as a parent, as a father, like, that would, even though it's Joffrey, that was still really hard for me to watch. Like, he was a little boy wanting his mom at the end, and that was really interesting to me.
That's the one thing that I really like about Cersei, and one of the few things I like about her is she stands by her children no matter what. And I could just tell, she, even though he was a really tough kid to have, I'm sure, she still loved him so much and would fight for him and was right there by his side as he died. So, but overall, I was very happy with the outcome of that episode. Although I would have wanted Joffrey to probably go out a different way. I was hoping for maybe Daenerys to come storming in with dragons and take him out in fire, but that didn't happen. So poison is, just as effective.
It is as effective. Yeah, I think it's a strength of the show and the books that most of the characters aren't wholly evil. They have a few redeeming qualities, like Cersei loves her children. So that's kind of a good segue. Andrea has a question. What did you think of Jaime's character development this season?
You all want to chime in first on that? I have thoughts. But you all want to chime in first on that?
Well, I really like Jaime's character a lot because he's evolved. He started out as, you thought he was pretty evil because he pushed, Bran out the window, but he's changed after all these things have happened to him, and I really like the development between him and Brienne because there's like something going on there. Even Cersei noticed it, and she pointed out to Brienne, asked her if she loved him, and But at the same time, Jaime has this relationship with Cersei that is, interesting. So I don't know how to feel about his character. I mean, I know he has some good points about him. He rescues Tyrion, always stands up for him, but he's also has this relationship with Cersei, which is interesting. So I don't know really what to think about him right now. It's kind of difficult to say. What are your thoughts?
I think, this relates back to some differences between the book and the show. I think he's a lot more distant from Cersei, or there's a lot more of a falling out at this point in the books than there is in the show. I mean, there was pretty much at least a reaffirming of their relationship, if not reconciliation, in the finale. So I guess I feel like the show, I'm not sure what they're trying to present with Jaime, because there was a very controversial scene earlier in the season where people felt was it a forced situation, and some of the showrunners and directors said conflicting things. So I think they've kind of muddied the waters, maybe not even intentionally, but just because of how they filmed it. So I think I definitely think his continued interactions with Cersei kind of definitely are not a step into redemption, despite freeing Tyrion.
Yeah. Yeah, up to this point, well, I mean, I should say, just as somebody who's familiar with the books, Jaime Lannister has always been one of my favorite characters. His arc has always been one of my favorites. And I feel like after this season of the show, I can't cop to that anymore, largely because of that controversial scene, which is sort of in the books, but it's a lot clearer that this is not a forced situation. In the show, it's not so clear. I love Jaime because he starts. I mean, the more the series goes on, the more you learn about how he's more honorable than he comes off as. I mean, he's got this label of this awful thing he did, which he actually did for a very noble purpose. He did a terrible thing to a child, and it was largely because of Cersei. But yeah, that scene just kind of messed things up for me. And what you were saying, Amy, the way that they've kind of drawn out this relationship, well, both of you are talking about, they've drawn out this relationship with Cersei in the show versus in the books. My wife was actually talking to me about this just the other day, and she had a very interesting point. By this point in the books, he's done with her. Leave me alone. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Largely because he spent some time with Brienne. He's got, he's lost his hand. He's got a different perspective.
And Cersei had also been having other relationships while Jaime was not present, which is not really something they had her do on the show. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's kind of changed. In some ways, that made her more sympathetic on the show, possibly.
It has, and it's also muddied Jaime's intentions in the end for freeing Tyrion. In the book, it's clear. I'm gonna free Tyrion because he's my brother, and Cersei, I don't care what you think. But in the show, he has a dalliance with his sister like 10 minutes before he goes and frees Tyrion, which is what my wife was talking about. And when she said that, I was like, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Yeah, it just kind of makes it seem like he doesn't, he's still torn between two directions. But Andrea, I'm interested to see what you thought of the big reveal with what happened with Tyrion's character in the finale. I felt like in the book they maybe even gave him a little more motivation to feel even more betrayed by his family, especially his father. But did you feel like since he's been such a fan favorite, did you still feel like he came out as sympathetic even after those murders?
I definitely still feel sympathetic for him. Mainly because, that we have Tywin, who has just treated him like he was, lower than low his entire life, not really his son. And so he's got that's building up all this tension. And then Shay. Shay is a woman who he loves so much, and, he, of course, they had their problems, and he said some pretty bad things to her. But she really portrayed him pretty badly. She knew that he was on trial for to be put to death, and she lied and made up things about him and Sansa, and things that they plotted apparently. And so he was very betrayed by her, by Shay. And so I feel like even though it was really brutal what he did to her, I can understand where he's coming from, because he goes into his father's room expecting to see his father, and he sees Shay instead. And he really loved her, and she pulls a knife on him. I kind of read an article, and they said that the knife wasn't pulled in the book, but still, I think that he had a right. He had good reason. I don't say it's good to murder someone, but I can understand where he's coming from. And then with Tywin, of course, I was rooting for him. I wanted him to take him out in the bathroom. I'm like, yes, this is the perfect spot. It was almost like a scene from Pulp Fiction or a mob movie. It's like the dad's in the bathroom and the son comes in, guns a-blazing. I mean, it was very interesting that it happened that way. So, but I definitely feel sympathetic for Tyrion still, even after all this. But I think that he's going to be very regretful in the next season. I think it's going to really tear at him that he murdered Shay, even though I think it was justified. So that will be interesting to see next season.
Yeah, Shay is going back to one of the previous audience questions about differences between the book and the show. There was a small difference with Shay from the book in the season that really bothered me, and it was the sort of scorned woman angle. They did a lot more. Well, there was this whole sequence of him trying to send her away, and she apparently is too dumb to figure out what's going on, even though she's clearly one of the smartest people in the room. Still can't seem to muster up any self-preservation and get out, or at least understand what it is he's doing. Instead, she's like, well, you don't love me anymore? Fine, I'm going to, testify against you. In the book, she was totally mercenary. None of that was there. She just was, I think, she liked him. She loved him, maybe, but she saw where the cards were falling. She's a smart girl and jumped ship. And to me, that made more sense than the whole scorned lover angle that they really played up in the show.
Yeah, that was an interesting development. And even though they mentioned on the show briefly Tysha, somebody he had a relationship with that his father tore that apart when he was younger, I think they tried to put more of that character into Shay, potentially, so that people could kind of have that identity of, the real relationship and the less mercenary relationship with somebody who they actually get to see on screen rather than just recalled.
Yeah.
Another comment, back to our conversation with Jamie. Andrea says, I agree with you guys. I feel like Jamie lost his identity and has to figure out who he is, but they've definitely muddied it up with the Cersei reconciliation. So, but now Tywin is dead, so I wonder if that is going to be a catalyst for change next season.
Yeah, now that Cersei has King's Landing to herself almost. Well, Tommen's around, but I still feel like she still tries to have all the power, even though Tommen is now king. She's still trying to get that power, and I just wonder. I just can't wait for everything to fall around her and her world to collapse, because I don't really like her character that much. But yeah.
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you wait long enough in Game of Thrones, usually what goes around comes around.
Yeah. There's comeuppance for everybody, even people who don't really have any coming. So speaking of stuff we're looking forward to, I think we'll move on and just talk about briefly what we think or what we can expect from the next season, both from the perspective of somebody who hasn't read the books and from the perspective of the spoiler-free perspective of those who have.
Yeah, so not having read the books, I wonder what's going to happen to Tyrion, of course, because now that Tywin's dead and Shay is dead, he's on the cargo ship headed towards Essos, that continent, so we don't really know where he's going. But I wonder who he's going to meet. now that he's going over there. Who's over there right now? Daenerys. So I'm hoping that somehow they meet because they're such likable characters, and I think the two of them together would be a really great pair. I don't know how it'll work, but that'll be interesting to see.
And Varys is with him, which
and Varys is with him.
Interesting, because that's new too.
Because they're kind of like friends and enemies, so I wonder how their relationship is going to evolve from here. Now that Varys is on his side, apparently he didn't abandon him, or he decided to go along with him. So that should be interesting to see.
Yeah, I definitely actually would like to see more of Varys. I couldn't pick him since he doesn't have a house, but he's definitely a character that I find really interesting because of the way he influences things and because of his stance on how he wants what's best for the people, but then, is he really, have some long plan, kind of like Littlefinger turned out to. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing some of the people who haven't seemed as important in past seasons, like Littlefinger and Varys, maybe have some more influence in the upcoming seasons. Mm-hmm. Oh, and comment from a viewer, Dorne.
Dorne! I agree. Or Dorne.
Yeah, so let's see the fallout from that horrible Red Viper death down in Dorne and how they're going to react to having their prince so brutally destroyed in his just quest for justice for his family. So
I never found Dorne all that interesting in the books, and all it took was the actor that did Oberyn to sell me on Dorne. Like, I'm ready. And it had Indira Varma, is that the actress's name, that played Ilaria Sand? She was great too. Mm-hmm. Primed for Dorne. I'm really excited for Bravos, personally. More Bravos. Arya and Bravos.
Oh yeah, and I also am excited to see, or interested to see, what's going to happen between Sansa and Littlefinger too, because that last scene in the second to last episode, or one of the last scenes, where Sansa emerges with her dark clothing and her hair is apparently dyed black. I don't know how she did that. Maybe with some box dye, but I think that was really interesting because her character has evolved so much. So I'm just wondering where that storyline is going to go. And I don't know if that's diverging from the book at all, or if that's how it does happen in the book, but that has fascinated me, what's happening between them.
We've moved a little bit past where the books have stopped with that. Sansa has, we knew it was kind of heading that way, but that last shot of Sansa Stark looking like Maleficent, getting ready to come, like suddenly having agency and us realizing that she's been paying attention to Baelish and she's learned something from him and she's got leverage on him now. Yeah, that's going somewhere interesting for sure. Speaking of that, and then something, Amy, that you were saying earlier, the timeline for me. Looking forward, what you were talking about the show catching up with the book, how it's going to play out, the ending. This season was supposed to have kind of covered Storm of Swords, but a lot of the scenes we saw were from later books. Daenerys' storyline is now well into the 5th book, translating across. That whole Night's King business was a shocker to everybody. Well, it wasn't really a shocker to people who hadn't read the books. For those of us that have, it's like, wait, what? Night's King, what? So for me, looking forward, I want to see, like you were saying, if it's even going to translate anymore, or if at this point it's going to diverge so much that it's going to be its own sort of story, and maybe George R.R. Martin will write the books based off of what the show does from this point on.
Well, I think definitely because of the way the next 2 books overlap in time period, that it will be good if they sort of play fast and loose with the timelines of the books and just present it in what makes sense for the show. And because it's its own storytelling. But we're nearing the end, so do we want to do a quick quiz?
Yeah, let's do a quiz. So we'll finish up with some book recommendations, but first I have a quiz for our panelists and those of you that are watching live. please feel free to play along. I have a bit part quiz. I have some pictures of characters that got small roles, sometimes a few lines, sometimes bigger scenes, that are not our main players. They all have names, though. They are in the book, sometimes a lot more than they are in the show. And they all have names that were said in the show as well. So my question to our panelists is, can you name who these people are? So the first round is going to be the Night's Watch round. I have a couple of crows that I'm going to show you. One of them just had a pretty big scene, so let's see if you can name this young man right here.
Okay, Grin. That's Grin.
Yes.
He lived on a farm.
That. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, just jump right in. Okay. So how about this crow right here?
And feel free to type in if you know and we don't.
Yeah, he's been around for a while.
Okay, I'm gonna guess Pip.
Pip is correct.
Yes.
That is Pip.
You're good, Amy. I'm not good at this.
Okay. One more crow for you. My favorite crow of all time. This guy right here.
Oh, goodness. I have no idea.
Best
Okay, Dolores Ed.
Yes, it is Dolores Ed, the Eeyore of the Night's Watch. That is him. Okay, all right. So now let's get into a round that's a little bit harder. We'll head over to King's Landing. Can you name this gentleman right here?
The drunk guy who helps out Sansa.
That is correct. That is him. Do you know his name?
Dantos.
It starts with D, yeah.
Dantos. Yes. Sir Dantos Hullard is his name. Okay, what about these two fine gentlemen right here?
Fine gentlemen, indeed.
They were first encountered by Arya.
Oh, Rorge and Biter.
Rorge and Biter. That is them.
Wow.
Biter, the handsome grill on the right there, he's the one that took a chunk out of the Hound.
Okay.
Okay. Now for the hard ones. These were the easy ones. Now for the hard ones. What about this guy right here, over in Meereen? He is someone that is not in the third book. He's actually from the fifth book. But show
on the, in Daenerys' side of things, I would guess, but
he introduced himself when he presented himself to Daenerys.
Oh, he's the one that came up and talked to her and asked her to let to have their bodies, the nobility's bodies taken down from the. Was that them? Was that man? I think?
That was indeed him.
Okay, I don't know his name though.
Yeah, no idea.
But I remember who he is.
Yep. Anyone chimed in from the audience? No?
I'm getting some delayed ones that are right for previous ones, Grin and Dantos.
Dantos, yeah.
But it seems like they're not coming through quite quick enough, so I don't know if anyone's guessing this one.
He's got one of those weird Meereenese names. His name is Hizdar Zolorak.
Oh, come on.
Hizdar Zolorak, and he is a very important character in the fifth book, which was surprising to me that he showed up so early in the show.
Okay.
All right, back to King's Landing. What about this fine man here?
He's on the King's Guard.
He is indeed on the King's Guard.
Okay, and
The Hound expounds on this man in this season.
Armory Locke?
No, it is not him.
Kettle Black?
Not Kettle Black. This man's name came up when during one of the many scenes of the Hound and Arya traveling comedy show, where he is giving her advice on how to be a good swordswoman.
Oh.
Meryn Trent.
Meryn Trant, Sir Meryn Trant. He survived because he had armor.
Oh God. Why do you have to bring that up, Justin? I'm still sad about her water dancer.
Yep, Serial for Port. I wish I had a picture of Serial, but he wasn't in the fourth season. Okay, time for the trick question.
Oh wow! And one of our viewers did get his star, Zoe LaRock. So
Darzel, yeah.
well
What
done.
about her? I'm going to be very surprised if anybody gets her, audience or panel.
Lady Tanglewood. I don't know.
Is she from King's Landing, or is she?
She is from the
She's
Vale.
from the Eyrie, or she's one of the vassals of the Eyrie.
She is from the Vale. Yeah, she is in the Eyrie. You were actually pretty close, Amy.
Smallwood, Acorn Lady. You're gonna have to tell me.
This is Lady Anya Wainwood.
Lanewood.
Wainwood. She was one of the ones that was interviewing, or I should say interrogating Peter Baelish in the Eyrie. As far as I remember, and audience members can chime in if I'm wrong, she's not there in the books. She's actually pledged herself against Peter Baelish and is outside the Eyrie in the books. But in the show, she's in the room with Jon Royce, trying to get to the bottom of what happened to Lysa Arryn. That was fun.
So I think you won, Amy.
Well, I think Justin won because he apparently knew all of these names anyway before you did this quiz. So
Yes, this entire game was just a way for me to show off, really.
Make me look really bad, thanks.
I figured, because you didn't have all the stuff from the books in the background messing with you, that maybe you can remember some of those names that came up. And you did. You remembered who most of them were, just not them.
Yeah, the names part is difficult.
Well, the names are hard.
Okay.
Shall we wrap up with some book recommendations?
All right. So it's a long wait between the show and the next season, about 10 months. So, of course, read the books of the series if you haven't read them. But then if you're looking for more stuff to read, I recommend some of these books that have been edited by Robert Silverberg. Legends is one of them. This one came out in 1998, so George R. R. Martin is in this, but doesn't even have top billing yet because he'd only written the first book, I believe. But it has a lot of short stories that take place maybe several years or decades before the things happen in Game of Thrones, but definitely in that world of Westeros. So you would definitely enjoy it, and also discover some other similar authors to George R. R. Martin in reading the other short stories in the collections.
Yeah, I had a book recommendation or a recommendation for another series. I really liked the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Now, it's a fantasy book, but it's also kind of Western mixed in with that, as well as horror. So it's got fantasy, it's gory, so it really reminds me of Game of Thrones in that sense, that there's that realism with the fantasy intermingled. But it also is a really great story. It's about 7 books, I believe, and the character development is just as good as Game of Thrones. So I really like that series. So I'd highly recommend that book, or that series, and the book Wizard and Glass was a really good one. That was the 5th book.
I usually go to Glenn Cook or Joe Abercrombie when I'm recommending read-alikes for George R. R. Martin, but honestly, so I've been familiar with these books for close to 20 years now, and I've seen them become sort of the fantasy touchstone, and I'm getting a little bit of grimdark fatigue, quite honestly. I'm getting weary of all the terrible things that happen in these books. So my recommendation is actually a book called The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams.
That's a great book.
It is so good. It is the first book in a series called Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Came out around the same time as Jordan, probably a little bit before Game of Thrones started. And it's got sort of a similar themes. There's an undead king and an other force coming in threatening the kingdom, but that series is very much the old school, kitchen boy is the chosen one to save the kingdom sort of fantasy, rather than the everybody is terrible and no one's safe and everything is awful kind of fantasy that is sort of in vogue right now. So if you want kind of a break from the grit and want some of that high fantasy, I'd really recommend Todd Williams.
I absolutely agree, and he has a lot of other great series. If you enjoy Dragonbone Chair, that's probably the most similar to Game of Thrones, though. And the best part is, it's finished. 3 books, all complete.
No waiting. Excellent. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much, those of you that have been watching live, for joining us. Thank you to Andrea and Amy for discussing Game of Thrones. And be sure to visit your local library. And if you haven't already, get the DVDs and the books on hold. Get caught up. And maybe we'll see you next season.
All right.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Valor Morgulus.